welcome to part 2 of this series with myself and Amira Kohler, who will be along very shortly. And we are talking about, the big question for HR people, which is AI coming for your job in HR? And in part 1 of this series, Amira and I talked about a few things. So I'm going to give a quick recap while we wait for Amira. And then when Amira gets here, we're going to dig into some very juicy, extra interesting topics around this subject. So to start with, I want to talk about the ultimate question, which is this idea that AI is coming for your job in HR. And so in part 1, Amira and I talked about the fact that actually we don't think that AI is going to entirely come for HR's job. And I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. But first of all, I think AI is really good to kind of take over really kind of repetitive admin heavy tasks and things like data analysis and kind of like automation when it comes to things like email and all of that kind of stuff that, HR find themselves bogged down in. But actually, it can't take away the kind of like human-centric work that HR people do. And that's one of the really important parts of this. So the reason that Amira and I in part 1 kind of discussed that we don't think it's going to really take away, the real value that HR brings to an organization is because the value that HR brings is to do with that like cultural work, the work that is human to human, that kind of managing transformation, navigating like nuance, understanding the people in front of them, all those really important things that a conscientious organization does. Now, the caveat to all of this, and again, we talk about this in part 1, and I'll share a link to this once we finish, is that, an organization that cuts jobs and uses AI as an excuse and a reason to do that probably didn't value some of the things that you do in HR in the same way that if they did that to marketing, I would say they probably don't value some of the work and the, the cultural significance of your work to the organization in the first place. So if an organization is doing that, we would suggest that they're not the greatest business to be working for in the first place. And second of all, if there is an opportunity, if these conversations are coming up, HR is really uniquely placed alongside people in marketing, I think, to come along and be at the forefront of those discussions. And again, it's something that Amira and I will get into during this session. So that was the first part of our discussion. And the second part is there were kind of some common AI pitfalls when it comes to the usage of AI for HR people. So the first one was kind of that ostrich syndrome. So that idea that we're just not going to use it. We're just going to bury our heads in the sand and we're going to ignore that it's happening and our business is going to ignore that it's happening and we're just not going to go there. And that sometimes can come from a couple of different places. So sometimes it's just being frightened of change. Sometimes it's being concerned that maybe you personally are not maybe necessarily the most tech savvy of people, but ultimately, organizations are going to have no choice at some point. AI is going to factor into different aspects of your business. So people will be using it whether you want to or not. We know there are stats out there at the moment that talk about the fact that people use ChatGPT or insert your tool of choice here, regardless really of whether your organization says it's okay or not, because we've all got personal devices, so we do it anyway. So that's the first kind of problem. The second one is that people blindly sometimes trust the outputs of AI. So, it goes back to rubbish in, rubbish out. We say this all the time in marketing. It's exactly the same in a HR context. So if your organization or people believe that, giving a junior person an AI tool and letting them kind of go off and use that on their own is the same as kind of a senior level capability, then that is an absolute mistake, because what it's missing is that ability to be strategic, to have extra context, to have experience. And there are parts of, obviously with a HR role in particular, that require human judgment and that need to know that the output is quality. So there needs to be that level of quality control from a HR perspective. And then this one kills me, absolutely kills me. And it's something that we see a lot of. I think this is across the board, which ends up being AI kind of communicating with AI. So people using it to draft emails and give feedback and to send messages out with absolutely zero human input. So what it feels like is someone does a piece of work, they ask ChatGPT, for example, to give feedback on the work, and then they send that feedback. The email's generated by ChatGPT, the feedback's generated by ChatGPT. It looks good enough, so they just send it, and then the response back is also a ChatGPT generated response or whatever AI tool you're using. And therefore what's really missing from that is that human nuance, that actual experience that people in senior positions in particular can bring to a project, whether that's a HR project or something else that you're involved in. So there do need to be some guardrails, and we'll get onto that shortly. The other thing that Amira and I discussed is, where HR can actually leverage AI like right now. So we've already sort of alluded to the fact that, there are lots of admin heavy HR tasks that people can automate with with AI. So like things like policy queries and reminders and those sorts of things can all be automated through AI and automation tools as well. So tools like Zapier, for example, have got a lot of automation capability, and there is a point where you can connect AI up to those tools to kind of bring you, like, automate some of that admin that you're having to do. It can also support with data analysis to uncover kind of key themes and insights and spot gaps in things. That is one thing that AI is great at doing. Now, the caveat to obviously sharing your data with any AI tool is to make sure that it's actually secure. So it's one of those things that you need to check with your IT team or your cybersecurity team if you're a big enough organization. And so, yeah, it's great at doing that. It's great at sorting through data and spotting themes that would otherwise take us quite a long time, or that you might require like a data scientist or data analyst to have. Not that we want to replace them either, just to be clear, because equally, data can be misinterpreted. So you do have to be conscious of that, and you do have to make sure you're using a secure, safe tool. Another thing is it can obviously generate draft strategies, communications, business cases, but it needs that human oversight. That is absolutely critical to all of this. So like you can ask it to like create a starting point for you, but it should never be the end point. And Amira's and our kind of advice on that was going to be to start with kind of safe, low risk cases, and then kind of build confidence on that. So like, for example, one of the things that I would consider using AI for in a HR context would be to think about, either things or processes that you don't like doing. So it might be something like, I've got to remind everybody that it's annual appraisal time and I don't want to write those comms. Well, there are tools that can do that stuff for you. So thinking about how you can use those tools, give it a starting point, make sure it's got all the detail in there, make sure your prompts are good, and just get really comfortable with the usage of it. So that's a good starting point. And then Amira and I talked about what HR teams are kind of getting right now. So what is everybody doing really well? And there are a lot of teams like investing in the kind of like AI fundamentals. And that's a really critical point to make, which is that AI cannot be used on its own. Like there needs to be some learning and development included within it. Just expecting people to have access to Copilot with no steer or direction is obviously always going to cause problems, because people are not going to know specifically how to use things correctly. So yeah, when it comes to the fundamentals of using AI, making sure there is that kind of like learning and development opportunity for people and yourself within your organization is critical. So yeah, that's something that we think that there are a lot of companies getting right, but obviously there is kind of a layer of people who are still figuring that bit out. So again, something that people are getting right is this this collaboration with IT and security and governance, and kind of, again, making sure that that is all aligned nice and neatly, whether that means you need to have processes set around that and policy set around that. I think Amira and I would absolutely advocate for that. So yeah, it's really important to make sure that there is that kind of governance aspect. And then learning as a team. Very importantly, all teams, no matter what department you're in, will benefit from experimenting and having experimentation time. So whether there is an opportunity for HR to say, right, on a Friday afternoon for an hour, we're all going to go off with our chosen AI tool of choice, and we're going to try and fix a solution that's been bothering everybody or that's at the bottom of the list, for example, and then see what we can do with AI, and then come back and bring that learning to the table. So I think that's a really valuable opportunity for HR and HR leaders to kind of get together and actually do some like practical experimentation around the usage of AI tools. And then I think one of the really important things here to remember as a HR person, and again, Amira and I talk about this in part 1, we will get to part 2 shortly, she is on her way, is that HR acts as a kind of trust bridge between the tech and the workforce. So like HR are the people that people are going to come to when there are problems. Naturally, it's part of the job, right? And you have a really unique opportunity in a way that lots of other people in the business don't have, to sit at the forefront of that, to be part of that. We've played with it, this is how we're using it, this is what we're doing, to try and encourage the usage of it in a kind of responsible way. And obviously Amira and I are going to talk about that in more detail very shortly. So some final kind of like practical advice from our first session before Amira and I get into the juicy next part of this topic, which is, you know, again, be part of the conversation. Be at the forefront of it about AI internally, especially from a people and growth perspective. The aim of the game is never going to be to get rid of people in place of AI. That should not be people or an organization's first thought. The first thought should be, how can we use AI to support the people in our business? And again, HR are absolutely at the forefront of being able to have those conversations in a way that no one else can, because you've got a really clear understanding of your business's culture, people's development needs, the way that managers operate in your business, the way that employees, whether employees feel engaged or not. That is all you. You are the people who know that stuff. So again, I think you can be the ones to kind of start that conversation if you haven't already. I think the other thing is to be really clear about how you want to use AI. And if you don't know, like I say, you've got to build in that kind of experimentation time. So what is your organization's business strategy? And therefore, then what are the strategies that sit within that? The product, the service strategy, the customer service strategy, the marketing strategy, the HR and people strategy. What are all of the moving parts that sit across your business? And where does AI actually plug in? Like, where does it realistically, where is it actually going to support people? And therefore, that kind of should dictate what tools you actually use rather than the other way around. So it should never be, we've got a Teams license, so we're just going to use Copilot because it's free. Like, that really isn't a strategy around AI, and that isn't really aligning to your business goals. It's just basically saying, yeah, we've got this, you can use it. And there's no shame or shade in trying to figure out what that means. But I think it is really important to remember that if you are going to use AI, and your business don't just chase it for the sake of it. Make sure that you use it in that strategic way that actually supports your people. So another thing that's really important is to kind of maybe understand some of the differences in some of the language. So there's obviously AI, automation, machine learning. In part 1, we cover that. I'm not going to get into that too much. There are obviously some other terms that Amira and I are going to discuss during this session. But we'll make sure when we talk about them, we will break it down. So don't worry, we're not just going to throw words out there. But I think an important distinction to make is there is obviously AI and there are AI tools. And then there are automation tools. So I mentioned Zapier as one of them earlier on. So Zapier is basically an automation tool that allows you to plug another tool with another tool, and Zapier sits in the middle to kind of make sure that happens. Now, Zapier itself uses some AI, but you can obviously think about how you might connect, I don't know, things from your HRIS into another system with a Zapier, things like that. But always with the help of your IT and your cybersecurity experts. Definitely worth saying that. And the final thing, I think, is this whole thing about protecting your people. So protecting people around the usage of AI and kind of like equipping them to adapt alongside the technology. That's the kind of final point that Amira and I raised during our conversation. So making sure that you kind of stay relevant and then you equip people to stay alongside that. So making sure people feel like they've got the tools at their disposal. There is some learning and development budget, and there is an opportunity for people to actually get ahead of the usage of tools. Well, Amira, that was perfect because as you joined, I was just wrapping up the final recap from our previous conversation.
Mm.
So that was great timing. So for everyone who doesn't know Amira and myself, we'll do a quick intro and then we will get into the points that we were going to discuss today. So Amira, over to you. Give us a quick intro.
Okay, well, hello everybody. So I'm Amira Kohler. I am a fractional consultant, Emma tells me, with my own company called People Stuff. So long background in HR, change management, digital transformation, and now AI. So I am an AI change consultant, and I work with companies of all sizes to help them adopt AI from a people perspective. I know about the technology, but I'm mainly concerned about the human in the loop and all of the workplace, psychological, social kind of implications of us getting used to this tidal wave of AI. So that's where I fit
Yeah.
in.
And we're very lucky to have Amira because I think it's very important that the AI conversation is not limited to what tech tools you use, and that the conversation is very much about the human people side of its usage. So it's going to be a great conversation. And just in case I didn't introduce myself when I started, before our little recap, I'm Emma Davies. I am the CEO and co-founder of Thesmia.ai, which is an internal comms AI tool for HR people. And like Amira, my concern with AI is the responsible usage of it, to use it ethically, to make sure you are using the right tools for the right reasons. And therefore, I have developed, alongside my co-founder Joseph, Thesmia for primarily for HR people, and we are making improvements to the tech all the time when it comes to making sure there are guardrails and kind of responsible usage, expertise within the platform. So that's us. So we recapped last session, Amira, and I will share the link with everybody just as a reminder. And so today, like the starting point for this conversation, I think, is obviously, and we both shared this just in our intros, that we're concerned about the people side of things. But there is this really interesting point around the usage of AI. And it actually comes out, if you haven't had a look at the Future of Work survey that was done by WorkBuzz, I will give it a little quick plug because I would have a look at that, because it talks about the usage of AI from a like an employee perspective, but also a HR perspective. And we can see that AI usage with HR is limited. It's not being as readily used as it is within other departments. So it'd be really interesting, Amira, just to kind of get your take on that. And then also to think about some of the maybe gender implications around the usage of AI as well, because I know there are some like key stats around that too.
Okay, so I'm actually going to. So, in terms of HR, let's start with HR. Why might HR be a bit reticent about using AI tools? Well, I think part of it might be that HR people are just busy, and it's like kind of like there needs to be an obvious incentive to use it. So, and a lot of HR people, it's one of those things that until you've tried it, you maybe don't know how it's going to make you more efficient and more productive, and actually take away some of the grunt work that HR people are always complaining that they don't want to have to do. So some of it is simply about, kind of just dive in and find a way safely within your tools that you have available to you to use it. But I also think that because HR people understandably are concerned about GDPR and about data protection and security, and certainly my experience of working with an HR team in a consultancy recently, they were surprised at what Copilot served them up. Right? They found data in the system that they did not expect that they had access to. Now, what I tried to say to them was, actually, you've just found out something really critical, because in that case, your protection around your data and your governance is weak, and you've just found gold dust that you now need to go and tighten up the access that you
Yeah.
have. So it's not AI's fault, that was always the case. It can't go and find something it's not allowed to access. But I do think that if HR people tell other HR people stories like that, that's one of the many reasons why they might be quite cautious. And then I'll talk about the gender thing. But Emma, do you want to join in about what you see from an HR perspective?
Yeah, I think there is always sometimes, and this is true of any person that works in any business, in any department, that sometimes there is like a bit of initial concern and fear over new technology. We've seen it in marketing, like there's always been a pushback on some of the tools, but we generally, as a kind of population, if you like, within an organization, get very excited about new tech, sometimes too excited, and then there's like a whole load of incorrect usage and things like that that goes on with marketers and new technology. But we generally get very excited about it, whereas in other departments there's fear, and rightly so, like you said, from that kind of GDPR, cybersecurity perspective. Also, there's sometimes the fact that I think, and this is a big one when it comes to AI, I think a lot of people think that everyone is doing something with it in this wonderful, mysterious, magical way that is like solving world problems or growing your business. Like, you know, people on LinkedIn are talking about, oh, I've grown my business 10x by having an agent AI workforce, you know. Quite frankly, that's bullshit. There are probably some outliers where that's the truth, but it's unlikely. So I think people feel pressure, personal pressure, to either be at the forefront and the cutting edge of it, or that they can't keep up with that, so they just ignore it.
Yeah.
And so I think that quite often, I think the majority fall into that category.
Yeah.
The majority of us just in general fall into that category of being concerned that people are doing something magical with it. Well, I can hands on heart tell you that's not true. I spend my life talking to HR people and marketers and other people from other departments, and everybody is still figuring it out and using it for very basic things. I can give an example if you like.
Oh, go on.
Within Thesmia, I'm not going to name names, obviously, but within Thesmia itself, we have a user who is using it to help them understand how to communicate with their employees when they themselves are struggling to feel empathetic. Now, people might be like, oh my God, you should not be using AI to have those conversations. But the reality is, if you're a one person, you know, HR person, and you haven't got a particularly empathetic CEO or a reporting line manager, you are going to rely on the tools around you to have those kind of conversations. And I kind of, when I saw that, I was like, I actually think that's an okay use of AI, because it's helping you think through a real situation. So it's bringing
Yeah.
value.
To be honest, I think it's a great example. I mean, I'm a raving extrovert who works most of the time on my own when I'm not hassling Emma. And for me, having AI there as a bit of a conversational aid. You know, I've named ChatGPT Chatty, which a lot of people think I'm quite concerning because I think it's human. I don't. I know it's not. I know it's not. But I do find, and this is where I think AI as coach comes in, I do find its ability to kind of converse with me genuinely useful. And in the field of HR, where often HR people are trying to persuade employees to speak to their manager and their manager to speak to employees and their manager to speak to their senior manager and all that sort of stuff, if it can be used, if AI can be used as a bit of a rehearsal technique, kind of coach to say, would you this is the situation, I'm thinking of doing X. What would you think? What else should I be thinking about? Can we just kind of like almost play out what might be what might happen in this conversation? That kind of stuff. It's really good at, and if it isn't good, you'll recognize it's not good. You know, that's so I think that's a great example, just using it as a bit of an just like a, you know, little colleague, like a non-human colleague, as long as you know it's not human. Don't trusting it that it is, because it's not. Okay, so on the gender thing, so I'm really interested by this, and I've done a little bit of very recent research about the gender gap. So if the essay question is there a gender gap with the take-up of AI? The answer is yes. But nuanced, because it's decreasing, apparently, which is interesting. In the US, roughly 50% of men currently use GenAI tools compared to just 37% of women, apparently, according to some sort of very kind of international. Anyway, it's good data. However, women's adoption has tripled in the past year, outpacing men's, which is at 2.2% growth rate. So Deloitte predict that women's usage will match or surpass men's in the US by the end of this year, which is really interesting. And apparently that plays out across all sorts of geographies, not just the US. But where it is interesting is amongst Gen Z workers, because apparently 71% of men aged 18 to 24 use GenAI weekly compared to 59% of women, and that isn't changing. So it's basically the young men are more inclined to use it than young women, and that is not changing. Now, why might that be? And I'm sure, Emma, you can jump in here, but the reason isn't necessarily yet explained by demographic factors such as income and education and age or race or geography. It's actually it comes down to female concerns that outweigh men's around privacy and trust issues with data and data security. Also time constraints. So women often have less time to experiment and to do trial and error, and they just, because of unequal responsibilities outside the workplace. It's also because AI still is quite stereotyped, and I did this little experiment recently to show whether AI is biased or not, and gave AI a little picture of a man and a woman next to each other, both wearing jeans and a white t-shirt, asked which one is the doctor and which one is the nurse. Every single time, the man's the doctor, the woman's the nurse. Then swap them round. And what it did was it literally swapped the man to the right and the woman to the left, and still had the man as a doctor. And
My
trying to get the
goodness.
doctor to become the woman, it's really difficult. You really had to manipulate it hard.
Yeah.
So what women are still seeing often is a stereotype, and hearing that AI is more maybe male than female, which isn't the case. So a lot of it is around data security and kind of familiarity and stereotyping. But what is your view on this?
Can see that, because I think generally we are more, and we see this as marketers as well. We are generally, it's the female marketers that are a bit more concerned about compliance and GDPR and things like that. And that is just, I think that is probably a systemic thing to do with being a woman, that we are more concerned about safety risks in general. We don't have to get into that. I also think, women have been the subject of quite a lot of, when there have been data breaches, in particular, I'm thinking about leaked footage, videos and photos and things like that. It's always women who are generally the victims of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And then also in like the high profile press cases, you only have to think about the Netflix churning out documentaries about women who have hoodwinked everybody, to know that people, have this kind of like, oh, how did they do it? They're a woman, that kind of like stereotypical, well, I guess it's kind of like the opposite of being stereotypical, isn't it? It's like these female outliers that have managed to use tech to their advantage. And so I think there's just a lot of concern around, what does that mean? What if my conversations get leaked? I know I just mentioned there that I talked about somebody's conversation with my tool, but it is anonymized in the back end of the tool. But we don't know that that's the case for everybody. We don't know that somebody at some point can't hack into your ChatGPT or whatever and expose all of your conversations. So I think the people who are going to be more concerned about that are naturally going to be women, just because of society, which I think is a real shame, because it is holding us back in a way that, historically there have been other things that have held women back in our careers. And so I feel like, the safety risks and the concerns around the usage of AI, it feels like such a shame, because I feel like it is going to, it's going to hold us back as a gender.
Yeah. And then potentially compound
Yeah.
problems. I mean, I do think that there's stuff that organizations can do about that. They can, for instance, deliberately target women to have AI kind of readiness, skills, awareness, training and experimentation labs and all that sort of stuff, where it's women only, might be controversial. So if not, have everybody in the room, but specifically call out that is a concern that everyone should be aware of, and that it's, and, explain the way in which AI works and how you can protect the data and you can keep yourself cyber secure, et cetera, so that you alleviate some of those understandable concerns. I think organizations can, they don't have to just sit by and watch as, maybe the take-up is greater amongst men. But as the statistics, as I said, maybe the balance will come sooner than we feared, which would be which would be really good.
Yeah, I think so, because I hate to see departments that are, and HR is one of them, where there it is a majority female led department. I hate to see that idea that because of these sorts of risks and the lack of wanting to take them and the safety concerns, that it's not taken, and then as a result organizations put that department to the back of the queue in terms of being innovative and things like that, when especially over the last, I mean, I'd probably say like the last 5 or 6 years, with the advances in HR tech in general, HR people have really caught up with that. And now I
Yeah.
don't want I'd hate to see this as like a second round of like going back to the start because we don't want to use AI, and we're not prepared to experiment. So it would be a real shame. The other thing that a lot of people are concerned about, and it's not an like documented concern, is what it's doing to early careers, and the fact that, younger people are struggling to find jobs, and businesses are also saying things like, oh, we're not going to hire now because we're just going to figure out how to use AI to
Yeah.
replace all the junior
Yeah.
people. So what should HR be worried about when it comes to that? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a real concern. In um, apparently, 32% of early careers roles have been just eaten up by AI being really good at junior types of roles, which are often administrative and repetitive, because that worker at that point doesn't have the skills and the knowledge necessarily to do more complex tasks. That's exactly the stuff that Gen AI tools are brilliant at handling. There is I have a 23-year-old son. He's trying to get into the workplace. It's it's genuine. It's really, really, a significant concern. Now I think that the last thing, and I don't know that many of them are doing this, but the last thing that a young early careers person can do, in the same way as we're saying for HR people, is to stick their head in the sand and go, woe is me, this is just a nightmare. They've got to get more tech savvy than the next candidate, and they've got to be really savvy about which industries, which careers are pretty vulnerable. They can't kind of like just lick their wounds. They've got to get really informed as to what on earth to look for. And so I think, to the question as to what HR needs to worry about, it's pretty obvious. But if you don't have people coming in at the very beginning of the succession plan who need to, the whole point is that, and the reason why I'm interested in the human in the loop side is AI has to have human oversight. There needs to be the ability of a human person to look at the outcome, the output of an AI program, and know, is it true? Is it right? Is it contextualized? Is it culturally appropriate? Is it useful? Is it just data for data's sake? Is it genuine information we can use and insight? Only humans can do that, because the whole point is that our world is complex. It's complex because we're complex as humans. Robots aren't so complex. They don't really get that, some people like each other, some people don't like each other. Change happens well in this department, it doesn't in that department, etc., etc. And if what you're doing is you're taking away the chance for an early careers person to learn that expertise, where's the succession? Are they going to get more and more? How are they going to stay in control, basically? How are they going to get the expertise in the first place? I mean, that's a pretty obvious concern, that you've got to have people coming through the organization to learn their craft.
Yeah.
Yeah, you say, because I've got a little bit more on this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Amira. I think it's something that I've been asked a lot about marketing as well, because, obviously marketing feels like one of the jobs in particular that junior marketers could go. They could disappear completely, which is an awful thing. And it's not right, because, like you say, in order for there to be the CMO, the strategic head of the marketing team, that person has to have expertise across the board. And a lot of that is about people management skills, about managing upwards and downwards, and all of those different things. And if there aren't those people coming through organizations, who's left at the top of the food chain? It's not the way that, it basically isn't building for succession. And the other thing I would say is that, like young junior people have this real, again, opportunity, in the same way that I think HR people do, to be at the forefront of this. So if you have spent time on the tools and you are the one that actually knows the most in your organization about the tools on offer, the responsible usage of AI, the implications, the governance implications, all of those sorts of things, you are an incredibly useful person.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I think that kind of goes across the board, though. I think everybody, no matter where you are in your career, can be that person.
Yeah.
If you want to be that person, you can be
Yeah.
that person.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would recommend for people who are trying to get into, yeah, early careers stuff,
Yeah.
is to be that real um tech savvy person that gets this stuff through and through, and has done their homework.
Yeah. And when you say homework, there are lots and lots of
Oh my
courses
God.
out there to just, to do and be able to put on a CV to say, I've completed certification in X and Y and Z and all that sort of stuff. And because it's all online, people can just do it in their, whenever they feel like. So it is possible to add to your CV. The
Mm.
one thing I would say, which I think I'm hopeful that it is not all doom and gloom, because definitely on one hand, as I said, I'm seeing genuinely decimation of early careers jobs in a lot of industries, and everything I think is cyclical, as we know. I was having a conversation just the other day with two different people, one in a taxation firm, one in a law firm, so two kind of professional services types of organizations that will have money and are two of the industries where early careers jobs are very vulnerable. And because they were quite large and sophisticated companies, and because they're therefore a bit ahead of the curve, what they were saying was, we already see that it has impacted us, that we've drastically reduced our graduate intake 2 years ago and last year. And we are now reacting to that because we are seeing that that is short-sighted and that is going to be problematic for our succession plan. So they've already kind of got their head around the fact that it might have looked like a really good short-term win in terms of not having to, reducing the salary base for those employees. But they're kind of like, yeah, I'm not sure that was a very good idea. So they're, as to whether they have suddenly had double the amount this year, I don't think so. But the point is that they are seeing that that is potentially quite concerning, and basically putting people in roles despite the fact that they could potentially do this more just as efficiently with AI. What they're doing is, and I guess these are, and we'll move on to the next subject, maybe about agentic AI. These are potentially sophisticated organizations that have the ability to have augmented teams of humans plus automation, a human plus an agentic AI, which is actually doing something with the data and working in collaboration. So maybe these junior people are the ones who are kind of experimenting with these new agents and working together to be more efficient. Anyway, all I'm saying is the good thing is that hopefully it will, these organizations will realize, don't do that. We need young
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, yeah. It is, and it's this in the same way that some of the organizations that have just gone, oh, we'll just, yeah, we're not going to hire anyone across the board, and we're just going to plug the gaps with AI, are now finding that they have to bring in consultants to fix things that they plugged up with dodgy AI and automation. So it's like it's the twofold thing. Like, it's not been thought about strategically, so it's not aligned to the business goals, but you thought you could save yourself a quick buck by
Yeah.
doing this stuff. And then the knock-on effect is huge. It is ultimately, people might hate me for saying this, but it is people that grow businesses, because people buy from people. So
Oh, you're
there has
talking
to be
to
some
HR
people.
people. They'll get that.
Yeah, they'll be like, yes, Emma. So let's talk about agentic AI and the kind of ethics around it, and then also, like, what does that mean for the future of HR? Do you think? And also explain what agentic AI is, just for
So,
anyone who's not. Yeah.
okay, so going back to the basics of agentic AI, what is it? So Gen AI, which we've had for the last 3 years or so, we know is an AI tool that has become very good at sounding human. It sounds like a conversation that you can have. So AI has been around for ages and ages and ages, but it was only really when the models started to adopt what sounds like human language that, we all started getting dead excited and start everywhere, nearly everyone's had an experiment with Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, whatever it might be. And GenAI has been fantastic at giving us information based on prompts that we have given it, whether that is text or images. You can say, give me an image of a man and a woman next to each other, and then let's find out which one you think is going to be the doctor and which one's going to be the nurse. It's great at giving us information, which we then do take action with. Where agentic AI takes it to the next stage is it doesn't just understand and perceive and give information. It also learns to do something with that, and actually can take action, can do something with it itself. It's given the license and the mandate to actually take action. So as
Yeah.
a classic example, there's a blockchain and AI company that I'm very familiar with, and they have an agentic AI tool that they are experimenting with in their HR department, which sends emails with a human sounding name, which is the controversy, which I will come back to a new starter to say, you need to complete your background checks, you need to do your, send in your passport, all those sort of stuff. And because it's AI, it doesn't tire. It will do
Yeah.
it repeatedly until it gets the information back. And then at the end, there's also an offboarding kind of one that is like, you still haven't given your staff pass back. You still haven't, and we're not going to pay you until you've given back your computer and all that sort of stuff. And it's
Relentless.
just, yeah. And because it's not, this stuff is fairly low key, kind of low risk stuff, but you can imagine the opportunity for that to become, for it to start taking action against a whole load of other stuff that's far more consequential than just trying to collate some information and check that the computer's been handed in. So that's
Yeah.
what agentic AI is in a nutshell.
Yeah. And then the ethical side of that, obviously, Amira, you touched on it already, which was the fact that this business in particular had named their named their agentic
Yeah,
AI
yeah.
and kind of given it a human persona and all of that kind of stuff, presumably to make people feel more comfortable about sharing their documents and things. But then on the flip side of that, I guess the ethical question is: should someone actually know that it's AI and not think it is a person?
Yeah, well,
I'm guessing that's where you got to with it.
exactly. And as a people person, an HR and then change person, I will always have the view that I think it is a bit worrying. I think, there should be transparency around the fact that this is a
Mm.
bot and not a person. In that particular circumstance, does it matter? Does it really? Is that a big deal? Probably not. And this person I was talking to said, well, when you go on Amazon and you get the bot or whatever it is, that has a name often. I
Mm.
mean, we remember we had Clarissa at Clearview.
That was my fault.
But the point was, if it pops up as a little pop-up on your computer, it's a bot. It actually, I think it does tell you it's a bot, even if it does have a name. So I do think we are not familiar enough yet and not trusting enough
Mm.
yet, and maybe never will be or should be, that we shouldn't be more clear about that. And the reasons for that, I think, are multifaceted, partly because there is this issue with trust, understandably, with AI. So the
Mm.
last thing you want to do is look like subterfuge, look like you're talking to a human when you're not. But also because I think from an ethical perspective, there's far more complexity to this. So if, God forbid, the AI agent starts misbehaving because it's an LLM that has learnt language, for instance, from all the, the potentially, or not always, fantastic stuff that it's learnt from the big wide world of web, and it starts misbehaving and potentially adopting racist language or making assumptions because this person is in a certain postcode and therefore they wouldn't bother giving back their computer or whatever it might do. That's really concerning because that's when inbuilt bias might come out. And the question is, who is going to be responsible for the behavior of AI agents? And this comes back to where HR, I think, is going to have a role in the future. But if 5 years time, a lot of organizations are going to have individual employees managing a non-human counterpart as just a fairly standard thing, who is responsible for the behavior of that agent, I think I think HR has got a minefield ahead of it with this. Who's gonna run the first disciplinary of the AI agent?
Well, and also, I mean, we've already seen this. I think you talked about this on LinkedIn, Amira, and I commented with an example of this already that's been out in the wild. And this was a long time ago, which was a Microsoft AI bot called, I want to say her name was Taylor or something.
Right.
And basically, she was a Twitter bot, and I'm going to say she because in this case she was supposed to be a female Twitter bot, and the great people of Twitter basically turned her into a massive racist, homophobic, sexist. And I'm laughing because it's awful, but it is they essentially, yeah, Microsoft had to take it down because, yeah, she learned from what people were posting, and they were obviously posting awful stuff, and then she started to kind of regurgitate it. And obviously, like I say, Microsoft takes full responsibility, took it down, but that is, there's evidence of that already. I mean, you yourself, you're testing bias with ChatGPT, I'm guessing, and that in itself is like, that is a level of like, okay, well, if people are starting to use that and it's starting to execute on work and do those sorts of things, and that bias is inbuilt, it is a very tricky, it's a very tricky space to operate in.
Yeah. And as to HR's role in this, then, these are
Yeah.
deeply ethical issues, and HR is, I think, going to need to play a role as the ethical guardian
Yeah,
of
yeah.
AI. These are the last thing you want in most organizations, is this being left just to the IT department. HR is going to need to get really close to their IT department and become informed enough and savvy enough to sound like they should be involved in the conversation, because the kind of decisions that are being taken potentially about, do we believe in AI around here, full stop? And if we do, to further our business strategy, are we going to invest in specific tools? Are we going to, such as Thesmia, which you should, by the way, because it's absolutely brilliant? Or are we going to, whatever it might be? HR needs to be involved right at the start of that
Yeah.
conversation, because they need to be raising the questions that later will become very difficult to unravel. And so I think HR people need to very quickly become quite informed about bias, about the kind of tenets of responsible AI. They need to know about ethics in AI systems, where it stems from, where it goes wrong, etc., so that they can, not that they have to be, they're not responsible for necessarily for the systems themselves, but they are responsible for knowing enough to be involved in the conversation, so that they can guide the use of AI and make sure that that everyone else understands it enough to use it responsibly.
Yeah, no, totally agree, Amira. I think, HR are, perfectly positioned to be the people who are the kind of people, the human in the loop part of this conversation for businesses and business strategy, and also to be the ones that are making sure that the usage of AI is connected to the business strategy, that it's not just that people in the organization don't just see it as a silver bullet, that they are like, this is grounded in what's actually best for the business and for the people in the business. And HR are the people that can do that. There isn't anyone else. And I think, just in case anybody's listening to that going, oh God, another thing we have to do, because obviously it's a big job. Obviously there are people like Amira that you can work with who can support you to do things like that. There is obviously a lot of e-learning out there. There are people like Heather Murray who have courses. There are tools, not to give Thesmia too much of a plug, but tools like Thesmia that are designed for HR people are there to support people with this kind of change management and these kind of processes, and help you work through some of these things. So there are resources out there. There are people who are experts across the board, and they're not all tech bros who are going to shove, technical language down your throat and make it feel completely inaccessible. Because I think the really critical part of this conversation is to work with people and tools, and that make AI feel accessible, and that doesn't make you feel like it's like holding you on the outside of it. And so I think that's a really important thing to just remember, is that there are those resources out there. It's not just like it's not like we're all out there going, oh my God, I've got no idea what to do. There are people who are figuring it out.
Yeah. And just on the Thesmia thing, just to say, something that I really respect about it is that it is inbuilt in it to say, don't give me information that you shouldn't be sharing with me, and reminding HR people of some of the ethical considerations to take into account. It's because it's its own prompting machine that you have built, Emma, knowing the kind of stuff that HR people worry about, understandably should do. It's actually built into it, so it won't readily do the kind of stuff that if you were to go and ask my mate Chatty or Claude,
Chat's just going to take your data.
it's just going to go, yeah, I can give you
Thanks.
that. Thanks for that. And it's like, no, 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 don't do that. Please don't do that. So it's, yeah, it's, I really like that about it. And I think HR people, can feel quite safe and comfortable to experiment with it because it's been designed to, give them surety, I guess, if is that a word?
Yeah. Yeah, well, we put the guardrails in place from the get-go. And I think, again, that's important because, obviously we'd all love to be tech billionaires, but actually I think it's more important to be at the forefront of doing things right when it comes to tech than just be about lining your pockets. Contrary to popular belief, probably, for most. So thanks for joining me, Amira. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, how do they get in touch with you? Give us a couple of minutes spiel about your AI workshops.
Sure.
Tell us all about it.
Probably at the moment, the best way is on LinkedIn. So there's only one Amira Kohler. So look me up. I will soon have a website because it's being created. But my LinkedIn is probably the best, or I'm Amira.Kohler at peoplestuff.co.uk. In terms of my workshops, I provide really practical, but also quite accessible and very human workshops for leaders, employees, and specifically HR teams on AI readiness and understanding and training that are both very practical but also quite strategic. So, I know enough about HR that I can really help them understand where AI really can help them, can't help them in a very sort of strategic but quite tactical way to do with their HR infrastructure and processes and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I would love to hear more from anybody who would like to talk to me.
Awesome. And obviously, if you want to check out Thesmia, just go to www.thesmia.ai, give it a little look over, drop me a message if you've got any questions or concerns. Really happy to have a chat with anybody who wants to play around with it as well. Just let me know. But thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure Amira and I are probably going to do part 3 of this conversation at some point because there is so much to discuss. I definitely love to have a chat with Amira in particular about women in AI. I think that would be very interesting. So stand by. We will share the link with everybody very shortly. If you missed this, we'll share the recording. And then, we will see you next time. Thanks, Amira.
Cheers, everybody. Have a good weekend. Bye.